The Ukraine war is a very complicated matter that has resulted from decades of tension between Russia, formerly the Soviet Union, and Ukraine as a nation and a sovereign state. Summarizing this does not do justice to the conflict. It is merely an overview of the events leading up to the most recent headlines, and a touch on the politics involved. In order to have an understanding of what led to this conflict, we can look back to the 14th to 18th century. During this time, Ukrainian territory was split between Russia, Lithuania, and Poland. By the 18th century, Russia took full control of the territory. Russian and Soviet control following the revolution would remain until 1991. At this time, Soviet control of its republics was weakened, and on August 24th, Ukraine would declare independence. Later that year, on December 25th, the Soviet Union collapsed. From 1991 to 2014, Ukraine developed as a nation-state. However, the diverse groups within the nation-state created tension among the population. The country consisted of Russians, Moldovians, Bulgarians, Belarusians, Poles, Romanians, Hungarians, and many more smaller ethnic groups. On February 27, 2014, Russian soldiers advanced into the Crimean Peninsula, starting the Russo-Ukrainian War. Putin's justification for this action is to ensure proper conditions for the people of Crimea, and to be able to freely express their will. Putin was likely alluding to the prominent Russian population within the country through this statement, as many of the groups had unequal voices in political choices. The war ended on March 26, 2014, with the complete Russian annexation of Crimea. These events led to the current invasion and the news article itself. On February 24, 2022, Russian forces would once again advance into Ukrainian territory. However, this time they were intent on fully invading the country. Putin's reasoning for this conflict is still not entirely clear, but could relate to regaining influence over the Russian public. This is what happened after the invasion of the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. This invasion was planned to last 10 days, but a poor Russian performance during the first day meant most of the Ukrainian military was intact and able to mobilize in order to counter the ground and air forces fielded by Russia. Despite the shortcomings of the Russian military, they managed to take some strategic locations, including Kiev and major industrial and power sectors. This conflict has lasted over 2 years at this point, and the world has watched Ukraine regain territory through successful operations and Russian inability. I will now summarize some of the important events of the Ukrainian war and their dates. On February 24, 2022, the invasion begins. Kiev is captured, and Chernobyl as well, for reasons beyond my comprehension. On April 14th, 2022, the Russian flagship Moskva is sunk by Ukrainian forces, likely some form of cruise missile fielded by them. On July 31st, 2022, Ukraine begins bombardment of Crimean territory, which is Russian at this point. On October 8th, 2022, the Crimean Bridge is attacked with a resulting explosion coming from a tanker car. From August 29th to November 11th, 2022, Ukrainian counteroffensives begin, taking Kherson, which was previously Russian. On March 27th of 2023, the first modern Western tanks deployed. These were British Challenger 2s. On April 14th, 2023, the first active service T-55 was spotted in Ukraine. This is a very early Cold War relic, which is pretty interesting. From June 8th to August 31st, 2023, the second Ukrainian counteroffensive began, breaking the Russian front lines. On February 23rd, 2024, the first and only recorded downing of an Antonov A-50 happened. The A-50 is a converted cargo plane that was used as a AWACS system, or basically a radar. The article itself talks about Ukraine's recent advance into Russian territory. Over 1,200 square kilometers and 70-plus settlements have been captured by Ukrainian forces. The article documents a conversation between Arnie, a Ukrainian soldier, and a BBC News reporter. Arnie talks about how Ukraine's plan has shifted from survival to peace. According to the soldier, this action was made to force Russia into a peace agreement on acceptable terms. For context, multiple plans for peace have been drawn up by Russia, but all of them include a loss of important infrastructure to Ukraine, which would hinder redevelopment after the war and also the general economy. Ukraine has not yet agreed to any of these deals. Along with this, the attack also redistributes Russian forces away from Ukrainian territory, which allows for less resistance on advancing Ukrainian forces. It's hard to say what happens next. War is unpredictable. However, if Trump is elected as American president, it's likely this conflict will face drastic changes. Whether these changes are in favor or detrimental to Ukraine is highly debatable. All we know is Trump will, quote, end the war. In a worst-case scenario, Ukraine falls to Russian control due to a lack of support. In a more likely bad scenario, Ukraine's move to take Russian territory would allow for peace deals that are more in their favor than previous propositions. In terms of best-case scenario, Ukraine could regain its former Ukraine territory and even be capable of taking the Crimean Peninsula back after 10 years. Ukraine is a great case for nationalism due to its diverse and not entirely connected cultures. Ukraine as a nation-state was created in 1991 and includes many ethnic groups, as previously stated, who didn't necessarily share the same values, making representation complex within the country. However, there have been strides to unite the country, one of the most significant being the establishment of an internationally recognized language. For a timeline reference, Canada recognized it in 2016. Along with this, the war united all groups within Ukraine with a common cause. Granted, some of the ethnic Russian population was not included in this. A quote which has circulated through the internet especially highlights this. The quote is by an unnamed soldier who stated, "We weren't a nation then, but we are now." This sense of nationalism, built by the conflict, is what allowed morale to remain high, and a commitment to take back the Ukrainian territory to flourish within the population. Recent polls have even shown that over 80% of the population is willing to accept a longer conflict in order to reclaim previously Ukrainian territories.